How space pirates with principles become galactic heroes. The Crimson Tide hung in the shadow of the asteroid field like a predator waiting to strike. Captain Sarah, Reaper, Chen watched the merchant convoy approach through her ship's tactical display, her augmented eyes calculating vectors, weapon ranges, and profit margins with the cold precision of a born killer. 12 ships, reported her first mate, a scarred Altarian named Kesthal whose crystalline form had been shattered and rebuilt so many times it looked like a living mosaic. Heavy escort. This won't be easy. Sarah's smile was sharp enough to cut vacuum. Easy doesn't pay the bills. The Crimson Tide was a work of art. If art could be defined as the perfect fusion of speed, firepower, and barely controlled violence. Originally a human military corvette, Sarah had spent 5 years and a fortune in stolen credits turning it into something that made naval architects weep and pirates salivate with envy. Target the lead escort, Sarah ordered, her hands dancing across controls that had been modified to respond to neural impulses rather than physical touch. Full spread, plasma torpedoes. Let's announce ourselves properly. The attack came without warning, as all good pirate attacks should. The Crimson Tide erupted from the asteroid field like a demon from hell, her weapons blazing with the fury of a small star. The lead escort, a Zentorian heavy cruiser, never had a chance to raise shields before Sarah's torpedoes tore through its hull like paper. Direct hit, called out Weapons Officer Martinez, his voice carrying the excitement of someone who genuinely loved his work. Their reactors going critical. The escort ship died in a burst of light that illuminated the entire convoy. The remaining ships scattered like startled fish, their captains screaming orders in a dozen different languages, while their crews tried to process what had just happened. Sarah's reputation preceded her across the galaxy. The Reaper, they called her a human pirate who had never lost a battle, never spared an enemy, and never left witnesses. She was death incarnate, wrapped in flesh and armed with weapons that could crack planets. At least, that's what she wanted them to think. Attention merchant vessels, Sarah broadcast on all frequencies, her voice carrying the cold authority of someone who held life and death in her hands. This is Captain Chen of the Crimson Tide. You have 30 seconds to cut engines and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will be met with immediate and overwhelming force. The response was predictable panic, confusion, and the desperate bravado of people who knew they were about to die. Sarah had heard it all before, in 100 different languages from 1,000 different victims. Captain, came a transmission from the convoy's flagship. This is Admiral Velnari of the Galactic Trade Consortium. We are carrying medical supplies to the Kepler colonies. Surely you wouldn't. 20 seconds, Sarah interrupted, her voice cutting through the Admiral's plea like a blade through silk. The convoy's remaining escorts moved to defensive positions, their weapons powering up with the whine of charging capacitors. Sarah counted 8 ships, enough firepower to level a small moon, all focused on her single vessel. The smart play would be to retreat, to find easier prey, to live to fight another day. But Sarah Chen had never been accused of being smart. All hands battle stations, she announced over the ship's intercom. Time to earn our pay. What followed was less a battle than a masterclass in controlled violence. The Crimson Tide moved through the convoy's formation like a dancer through a minefield, her weapons reaching out to touch enemy ships with deadly precision. Sarah's crew worked with the seamless coordination of people who had learned to trust each other with their lives. Escort down, reported Tactical Officer Singh, his fingers flying over controls that managed the ship's defensive systems. Their shields are failing. Another one breaking off, added Navigator Yuki, her enhanced reflexes allowing her to plot courses through the chaos of battle that would have been impossible for an unaugmented human. But the convoy wasn't defenseless. Their return fire hammered against the Crimson Tide's shields, each impact sending shockwaves through the ship's hull. Warning lights flashed as systems overloaded, and the smell of burning electronics filled the recycled air. "Hull breach on Deck 3, called out Chief Engineer Patel, her voice tight with concentration as she rerouted power around damaged systems. "We're losing atmosphere." "Seal it," Sarah ordered, not taking her eyes off the tactical display. "Martinez, target their command ship, full spread." The Crimson Tide weapons spoke with the voice of controlled destruction. Plasma torpedoes and particle beams reached across the void to caress the convoy's flagship with deadly affection. The ship's shields flared and died, leaving its hull naked to the vacuum of space. "They're surrendering," reported Communications Officer Torres, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and disappointment. Sarah studied the tactical display, noting the positions of the remaining ships, the status of their weapons, the fear in their captains' voices. This was the moment that defined every pirate engagement, the choice between mercy and massacre. "Stand down weapons," she ordered. "Prepare boarding parties." The Crimson Tide boarding shuttles were works of art in their own right, armored, armed, and equipped with cutting tools that could slice through any known hull material. Sarah led the assault personally, as she always did, her powered armor making her look like a mechanical angel of death. The merchant flagship's cargo bay was a cathedral of commerce, vast spaces filled with containers that held the lifeblood of interstellar trade. Sarah's team moved through the ship with practiced efficiency, their weapons ready but not raised, their movements controlled but not threatening. "Medical supplies," reported Sergeant Kim, scanning one of the containers with her portable analyzer. "Antibiotics, surgical equipment, emergency rations. Looks like they were telling the truth about the Kepler colonies." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. Pirates who survived long enough to build reputations learned to gather intelligence before they struck. She had known about the convoy's cargo before she'd fired the first shot. Admiral Velnari was waiting in the ship's conference room, a dignified Zentorian whose crystalline form reflected the room's lights in patterns of barely controlled fear. He stood as Sarah entered, his posture suggesting someone who was trying very hard to maintain his dignity in the face of certain death. "Captain Chen," he said, his translator rendering his harmonic speech into flat human words. "I assume you're here to discuss terms." Sarah removed her helmet, revealing a face that was younger than her reputation suggested, but marked by scars that spoke of a life lived on the edge of violence. "I'm here to discuss business, Admiral. Nothing more, nothing less." "Business?" The Admiral's crystalline form flickered with confusion. "You attack our convoy, kill our people, and call it business." "I attacked your escorts because they were armed and dangerous," Sarah corrected. "I killed your people because they shot at me first. And yes, I call it business because that's what it is." She activated a holographic display that showed the convoy's cargo manifest. Medical supplies for the Kepler colonies, antibiotics, surgical equipment, emergency rations. Street value, approximately 50 million credits. "You cannot seriously intend to steal medical supplies from dying colonists." Sarah's smile was cold as the space between stars. "I don't intend to steal anything, Admiral. I intend to buy it." The silence that followed was deafening. Admiral Velnari stared at Sarah as if she had just announced her intention to become a vegetarian. "Buy it," he repeated. 50 million credits transferred to your accounts immediately. Full market value, no haggling, no delays. Sarah's expression was serious as a funeral. "In exchange, you report this as a successful delivery to the Kepler colonies. Your insurance companies pay out for the lost cargo, you pocket the difference, and everyone goes home happy." That's not piracy, that's commerce." "It's piracy with better accounting," Sarah replied. "The end result is the same. I get the cargo, you get compensated, and the colonies get their medical supplies." Admiral Velnari's form cycled through patterns that Sarah's cultural database, identified as deep confusion mixed with growing hope. "You're going to deliver the supplies to Kepler." "I'm going to sell them to the highest bidder," Sarah corrected. "Which, given the current situation on Kepler, will probably be the colonial government at a significant markup." "But why? Why not simply take the cargo and leave us to die?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on something beyond the conference room's walls. "Because dead merchants don't carry cargo, destroyed convoys don't generate insurance payouts, and scared trade routes don't produce the kind of regular traffic that makes piracy profitable." She stood, her powered armor making her look like a technological goddess. "I'm not in the business of destruction, Admiral. I'm in the business of controlled redistribution of wealth. There's a difference." The transaction took less than an hour to complete. Sarah's crew transferred the medical supplies to the Crimson Tide cargo holds while her financial officer, a former corporate accountant who had discovered that piracy paid better than legitimate business, handled the electronic transfer of funds. "Pleasure doing business with you, Admiral," Sarah said as she prepared to leave. "I trust this arrangement has been satisfactory." Admiral Velnari's crystalline form was now displaying patterns that Sarah recognized as grudging respect. "Captain Chen, in 30 years of merchant service, I have never encountered a pirate quite like you." "I should hope not," Sarah replied. "I work very hard to be unique." The journey to the Kepler colonies took 3 days through hyperspace. Sarah spent the time reviewing intelligence reports, planning future operations, and trying to ignore the growing unease that had been plaguing her for months. The Crimson Tide was more than just a pirate ship. It was home to 43 souls who had chosen to live outside the law for reasons as varied as the species they represented. Some were criminals fleeing justice. Others were refugees from wars that had consumed their homeworlds. A few were simply adventurers who found legitimate life too boring to endure. But all of them were family, bound together by shared danger and mutual dependence in a way that transcended species, culture, or background. "Captain," called out Communications Officer Torres as they approached the Kepler system, "I'm receiving a priority transmission from Kepler Prime. It's not good." The message was from Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the Chief Medical Officer of the Kepler colonial government. Her face on the screen was haggard with exhaustion and marked by the kind of desperation that came from watching people die when you had the knowledge to save them but lacked the resources. "To any ship receiving this transmission," Dr. Warren said, her voice cracking with emotion, "the plague has spread to all 3 colonies. We have maybe 2 weeks before total system collapse. We need medical supplies, antibiotics, surgical equipment, anything you can spare. We can pay whatever you ask." Sarah stared at the screen long after the message ended, her mind calculating profit margins and risk assessments with the cold precision that had kept her alive in a profession where most people died young and poor. "Captain," First Mate Kesthal's crystalline form flickered with concern. "What are your orders?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the cargo in her holds, the credits in her accounts, and the reputation that had taken years to build. Then she thought about Dr. Warren's face, about the desperation in her voice, about the children who would die if the medical supplies didn't arrive in time. "Set course for Kepler Prime," she ordered. "Maximum speed." "And the cargo?" Sarah's smile was different this time, not the cold expression of a predator but something warmer, more human. "We're going to deliver it, at cost." The Crimson Tide dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system like an angel of mercy disguised as a harbinger of death. The colony's defense platforms powered up their weapons, then powered them down again as Sarah transmitted her identification codes and cargo manifest. "This is Kepler Control," came the response, the controller's voice tight with disbelief. "Captain Chen, we show you carrying medical supplies. Is this some kind of joke?" "No joke," Sarah replied. I have 50 million credits worth of medical supplies in my cargo holds. I'm prepared to sell them to you at cost transportation and handling fees only." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of someone crying with relief. The transfer took place at Kepler Prime's main orbital station, a structure that had been built to handle the needs of a thriving colonial economy, but now served as a desperate lifeline for a dying population. Sarah watched as her crew worked alongside colonial medical personnel to transfer the supplies, their usual efficiency tempered by an unusual gentleness. "Captain Chen," Dr. Warren approached as the last of the cargo was transferred. "I don't understand your reputation. The stories we've heard are mostly true," Sarah replied. "I am a pirate. I do steal from merchant convoys. I have killed people who tried to kill me first." "Then why?" Sarah looked out at the stars, thinking about the choices that had brought her to this moment. Because sometimes being the villain means knowing when to be the hero. The payment for the medical supplies was transferred immediately. Not the massive profit Sarah could have demanded, but enough to cover her expenses and keep her crew fed. It was, by any reasonable measure, the worst business decision she had ever made. It was also the best. "So what now?" asked First Mate Kesthal as the Crimson Tide prepared to leave the Kepler system. "Back to piracy." Sarah smiled, her eyes already focused on the next target, the next opportunity, the next chance to prove that even pirates could have principles. "Back to business, but maybe we can be a little more selective about our targets." The Crimson Tide disappeared into hyperspace, leaving behind a system where children would live to see another day because a pirate had chosen mercy over profit. The story would spread, as stories do, changing with each telling until it became legend. Some would say that Captain Sarah Chen had gone soft, that she had lost the killer instinct that made her feared across the galaxy. Others would argue that she had simply evolved, that she had found a way to be both predator and protector in a universe that demanded both. Sarah didn't care what they said. She had learned something that few pirates ever discovered. Sometimes the greatest treasure wasn't gold or credits or precious stones. Sometimes it was the knowledge that you had made a choice that mattered, that you had used your power to create rather than destroy, that you had been more than just another predator in the dark. The galaxy was full of pirates, mercenaries, and killers, but there was only one Reaper who delivered medical supplies to dying colonies and called it good business. Blood and stars, profit and principle, violence and mercy, these were the contradictions that defined Sarah Chen and her crew. They were pirates, yes, but they were also something more. Proof that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, humanity could find a way to shine. The Crimson Tide sailed on through the endless night, carrying its crew toward whatever adventure awaited them among the stars. Behind them, the Kepler colonies began to heal, their people saved by the most unlikely savior of all, a pirate with a conscience and the courage to use it. The blood had been spilled, the stars had been crossed, and somewhere in the space between legend and reality, Captain Sarah Chen had found her own unique way to be human. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing for more journeys. Share your thoughts in the comments and stay tuned for the next adventure.